interim speed management plan, and just invite you, Peter, sorry to drop this on you, Peter and Charlotte from GHD. So welcome to the front table there, and it's page 57 from the 18th of December papers, so it's page 57, yeah. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll take this report as as read. I appreciate it as a quite a lengthy report that's been presented with a lot of detail. But I would acknowledge that the last 2 months in this space has been what we would call a very dynamic environment, and the incoming government has made a number of statements about how they want to proceed regarding how speed limits are set. We received information late last week, a letter from the Minister for Transport and from the Director of Land Transport for NZTA Whakatahi, outlining what those changes will look like and when they expect to introduce them. Probably the key piece of information amongst this is that they are revoking the deadlines for setting speed limits around schools and removing the mandatory targets that were set in the current speed limits rule. And they plan to introduce a new rule in early 2024. With those changes already announced, they have strongly urged councils, as road controlling authorities, to hold off on making any changes or decisions around speed limits until that new information is available. That has somewhat influenced our position here, while we have a report that sets out some recommended changes to speed limits. Given that we don't know the precise details of the changes to the speed limits rule, what may be required of us or what may be set in terms of new criteria, we believe a prudent approach would be to pause any further work or decisions on this proposal until we had that new information available, which we expect would be early 2024. And that would give the council an opportunity to make an informed decision on what changes it wants to proceed with. The work that's already been done is not lost. The consultation process still remains valid, and the council still has the option to adopt a speed management plan at a later date once we have that new information to hand. So nothing is lost, but it does give us the opportunity to move forward on a more informed basis once we have that new information from NZTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Anything from you, Charlotte? Okay. I'll open it up for questions. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So if we were to delay this, would it affect the funding that's available for it?
Yes, a very good question. We've already been in touch with NZTA to understand what the status of that funding is. So they approved $425,000 under the FAR formula, so that's 51% of the budget that we had set aside for this. That money expires on the 30th of June 2024. I've been given an assurance by the area program manager for Whakatahi that if the council were to identify an alternative project with similar objectives and outcomes, and that it met a cost-benefit test set by Whakatahi, that money could be repurposed for another project. An example of that could be setting some raised pedestrian platforms around schools, but those projects would need to go through a cost-benefit test through Whakatahi.
Okay. And if the guidance, as seems likely from the letter from the Minister, comes back to say that variable speed limits are preferred, what's the cost implication of that?
It's a little difficult to estimate what that full cost could be because there could be other changes to the rule around the extent to which we should be considering variable speed limits, as in the area around a school that could be included. But as an indicative guide, the report includes an option where we implement a variable speed limit for every school rather than using a mixture of variable and permanent speed limits. The total cost for all of those variable speed limit options would be in the region of $2.4 million.
Okay. And can you just explain why this report has been delayed repeatedly coming in front of council, since we were expecting it in September.
So yes, you're right. It was originally planned to come in September. The extent of the analysis required on the submissions was far greater than we anticipated. Calculating the additional work for the variable speed limits as the option Bs present in the report added a lot to that time. And then there were some other factors that came into play, such as staff sickness and then the significant workload that had originally been scheduled for the 6th of December.
Thank you.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ngā mihi kōrua. Just wanted to ask that as well about the Minister's letter and talking about permanent reductions versus variable reductions for the school zones. And I noted that the Minister's letter said that the new rule will also implement requirements for variable speed limits rather than permanent reductions. Is that something that we can take as an indication that what we've got proposed in this paper would actually be contrary to the new requirements?
Potentially, yes. I think nothing in the proposals that we've set out here is inherently flawed. But until we know the details of specific what requirements, what criteria we need to consider, we probably would want to see that before we made any further recommendations.
Thank you. And am I right in my understanding that the predominant cost associated with putting variable speed limits in place is a requirement that we have digital signs rather than standalone?
That's correct, yeah. And that's one of the things that we would be keen to see through the new rule, is whether that remains a requirement, and we don't know at this point.
Thank you very much. That's all, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just interested, Peter, picking up on your responses to Councillor Johnson around, I guess, what we might call Plan B in terms of utilising the NZTA Waka Kotahi investment. Are we actively pursuing a Plan B so that we don't run a risk of actually losing government co-investment and revenue coming into this community?
Given the kind of the late breaking news that came through late last week, there hasn't been a lot of work done on a Plan B. So my colleagues and I have discussed some possibilities, and the raised platforms around schools is one option. But to do work on that would need some assurance that the speed limits program is not going ahead, at least in the short term, because we wouldn't want to spend money and then not have the money to implement speed limit changes if it became possible, say, early in 2024. So it's a little bit of a predicament to, not make too many plans when we may have to revert to something that's currently on the table. But our infrastructure unit has already considered the possibility of raised platforms around some schools. It would be an exercise in identifying some suitable locations and undertaking a bit of an assessment on their cost benefit, whether they would stack up for the funding.
Could you give us any insight into how many schools we might be able to provide for in terms of infrastructure?
It's a very difficult thing to say without further investigation. The implications of storm platforms require very site-specific details to be known. I wouldn't want to thumbsuck a number without having a bit further information around the specific sites that are of interest. There's a lot of things to consider. So, yeah, it's something that could definitely be looked into, but I wouldn't want to give a number right here, right now.
Not necessarily after a number, but I mean, would it be most schools or would it just be a few of the schools?
So it would certainly not be all schools. There wouldn't be enough money to do all schools. Rail safety platforms are significant civil infrastructure compared to signage, which is what is expected for speed changes. However, there would be, I'd expect, a exercise to prioritise schools. It sounds like there's already some information there within the infrastructure team, and it would be certainly of interest to, given the time available, to identify the highest priority with potentially areas that have already been looked into to fast track some of those solutions. But yeah, it's definitely a bit of an unknown currently with not having done the full investigation.
Thanks, that's helpful. And can I know, just in terms of the minister's powers, are there any limits to them in terms of how far they can reach into communities and dictate things?
Under the current rule, the Director of Land Transport is able to, I believe it's correct any speed limit that it identifies as being inappropriate or unsafe. I do note that one of the changes coming through in this new rule is for the Minister of Transport rather than the New Zealand Transport Agency to set deadlines for the completion of speed management plans. So one of the things that may come through this new rule is a realignment of authorities in the space. But again, we don't know the details of that, so it's hard to know.
Thanks for that insight, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. That's no further questions. Okay, thanks, Charlotte. Thank you, Peter. I've got a recommendation to put up, and you're probably going to guess what it is that we have a procedural motion that the item be discussed. Yes, so, sorry, so that the item be discussed be adjourned to a later meeting in the year so we can understand the new government's rules and exactly what we can influence on a plan B. As the officers have said, there is some work there that hopefully can be salvaged. But I think it's pointless us doing much at the moment if the funding isn't there or if something gets changed later on. We just don't know what the landscape is. So. Yep, well, it is a procedural motion, so I'll ask you to vote on that, please. And that has passed 15 votes for and 1 against. Right. We'll now move to back to the 6th of December 2023. So that's number 9 back into our order. So invite Aaron Phillips up and if Kathy Deaver-Todd is here. This is around the Ashurst Motorhome dump station, the community engagement results and options. Now, it was in your 6th of December agenda papers. So over to you, Aaron.
Good afternoon, Mr Mayor and councillors. The first time round we reported with good news and some funding for this project. The second time round we're reporting that the community is not as enamoured with the proposed location as we had thought. Well, not that we thought they were enamoured, that we didn't expect this level of feedback. But just to quickly take you through it and assume you've read it, but we got 193 submissions, of which 80% were opposed to the proposed location, which, if you recall, and in your papers, is the adjacent to the sports fields car park outside the Ashurst domain. Most of the submissions in opposition thought that the location of the dump station should be more private. There was a suggestion there was a poor location as the entrance to the village. So as I said, it's fair to say that that was a higher level of concern than we expected when we went out to consult. We've revisited, the report goes a little bit further than just reporting on the submissions. It looks at other options for you and revisited some options. In particular, if you have a look at the table in section 5, page 141 of your agenda, a sort of a high level assessment of other potential locations with no particular weighting given to the criteria, just an overview for you to hopefully be helpful. The Sportsfield option remains a solid candidate, but it's not significantly better than some of the other options, and you might choose how you weight the community's feedback, I guess, will depend on whether you'd like us to look at other options. On balance, we thought it was now worth exploring the Custom Street option further before coming back to you for a decision on where to proceed.
Thank you, Aaron. Some questions, councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Aaron, for bringing it back. And I'm generally supportive of the Custom Street option, but I wondered, is there a risk if we go back out to find out more about Custom Street, that we'll have exactly the same conversation again, that the people near that don't want it either?
We don't know the answer to that question yet, councillor. We'd need to go and talk to the neighbours in particular. We thought the flavour of this feedback was solidly in favour of somewhere. It wasn't that necessarily that people were opposed to a camper van dump station. It was the location that most of the concern was expressed about. So we think in the Custom Street and in an industrial environment, and one in which the roading team are currently converting to a cul-de-sac arrangement, so there'll be no through traffic in that area in the future, is likely to be well supported, but I'm making an assumption there. The first step, if we were to look at Custom Street, would be to go and talk directly to the neighbours and get some feedback before we progress to any sort of design or feasibility.
Right, thanks, Aaron. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Harpeter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Aaron. Is this just not a case of not in my backyard?
I guess that's asking me to make value calls on the feedback from the community. We certainly expect that there would be some element of the community that live immediately adjacent to it having opinions, but there was 193 submissions, so it's certainly not just the neighbours who had an interest. It was a much wider section of the Ashes community. Yeah.
So we have to have it at Ashurst. We can't look at the refuge station down at Awapuni.
We built one at Totra Road in 2021-22, and then the intention originally had been to build 3 through the city to support the motorhome friendly status. This one was prioritised as a result of the Te Ahura Turanga highway work. The expectation a lot of the tourism community will coming back through that highway. It's off the beaten track through the Pahongana. And we also have some issues with the existing effluent dump station in the campground domain to do with falls and distances from pumps. So we thought we could have a cake and eat it too, and it's not quite as straightforward as we thought. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With the existing dump station in the domain, what year was that put in there?
Unfortunately, I can't answer that question. I didn't come prepared for that, and I'm not familiar. Sorry, councillor.
Okay.
I believe there's been the facility to dump waste in the domain for a long time, but I couldn't give you a specific year without going away and doing some other work.
Okay, no problem. And why would something like that be put in a park that closes, that wasn't open 24/7?
Originally, it was intended to serve the campground and the users of the campground, but as we're trying to achieve motorhome friendly status, we're looking to have something available for the wider tourism community that might not necessarily stay in the campground, so that sort of 24/7 access rather than being locked up at 9 o'clock at night.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Just a question regarding, I understood we had some funding attracted to provide for this. Is that at risk if we defer the?
Not currently, no. We've had some conversations with MB and they're comfortable that we might explore another option.
Okay, thank you.
All right. That's the questions. No more questions? Great. Thank you. Thanks, Aaron. Councillors, I've been out to Ashurst with my monthly Meet the Mayor, and I've met quite a few residents and some older residents there that have been there a long time, and they care about their domain. They don't have an issue with people coming in their camper vans, and actually encourage that there is some option for them for waste. But they did have an option at being outside their front door of the domain, not outside their front door, at the front door of the domain, which they really, really value. So I can sort of understand that a little bit. And anybody that's ever had or been in a hired motorhome or something, you can understand that it is a little bit of a messy sort of operation, and it probably does need to be in a more suitable area. So that's why I'm quite happy to move investigating Custom Street, which is very close to the domain. It's an industrial area. We're spending a little bit of money there in terms of the road itself, and it probably is quite an ideal place to put it. So I'm just looking for a seconder. Thank you, councillor Naylor. And I'd like to think we could perhaps get some support for that, and then it gives the officers and the community some sort of understanding of what we're doing. Comments, councillor Bowen.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yeah, really happy to support option 2, looking at customs. Really impressed with the feedback from the community. Have to say, I didn't get a sense of NIMBYism from that. I think the comments were genuinely and generally about what the community of Ashurst perceive will be best for the community of Ashurst, and Custom Street seems to line up better with that. So really go out and look again at this opportunity.
Great. All right, there being no further comments, I don't need to write a reply, so we'll just vote, please. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we'll move through to number 10 and invite Stacey Solomon down. And this is around, again, from our deferred items from the 6th of December. It's around the proposed dog control policy to go out, approval consultation. Page 143 of your older papers, councillors. Stacey, over to you.
Tēnei ngā mihi kai Kanihira, me Koromatua, ko ai ko Stacey Solomon, Policy Analyst. I'm pleased to bring you the draft dog control policy for your consideration today. The purpose of the policy is to explain to the community what they can expect from the council when it exercises its functions under the Dog Control Act. The policy specifies areas of dog control as well as the responsibilities and expectations of dog owners in the city. Further, this policy is a requirement for the council, so the council must have one. Many of you will recall that in 2017, the review of this policy was quite extensive. It underwent a significant rewrite at that time to align it with the Dog Control Act. So the current review has broadly found that the dog control policy continues to function well and as expected. Because of that assessment, we are not proposing to make significant changes. We are instead continuing to align the policy with the Act. You'll have noted from the report documents that the review of the policy is occurring at this time so that the dog control bylaw can be replaced before it expires in 2025. The dog control bylaw is the regulatory mechanism that the council uses to enforce the dog control policy. Very happy to take questions. We have officers from Environmental Protection Services here as well to answer queries.
Thank you, Stacey. Number of questions. First of all, councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Stacey. Just under 7.9, the additional clause around council engaging with the community before making an area which would usually be prohibited to dogs, a dog on leash area. I guess, does that change anything in practice, or is it more putting a clause in to describe what our current process is?
Correct. That is what we would do now. That is our current process. Putting that clause into the policy gives that assurance to the community about what they could expect if we were to take that sort of action.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Stacey. Just a couple of questions. I'm just drawing on my my notes from the previous meeting here. So page 152 talks about for preferred owner scheme. I think it's a new addition there. In case of emergency, there has to be contact. Just give us an understanding of why that's been included.
So since the last review of the policy, we have undergone a few kind of, I guess, shared experiences, you could say. We are having preparations in place for, in an emergency, that a dog can still be provided proper care. We would now expect that to be part of our preferred owner scheme, because that kind of good preparation, good planning for the ongoing care and maintenance and welfare of the dog in an emergency situation is ideal. So we're now including that as part of the assessment for preferred owners.
And that would only apply to new owners post the implementation of the new policy?
Sure, and as those owners that we're looking to apply for preferred owner
Okay, thank you.
status.
And the other question I've got, and again, excuse me, I'm just relying on my notes here, but Linklater Park, there's reference here, page 172, which is dogs off leash not within 30 metres of a children's play equipment. Can you just comment on the, I guess, the suitability of that particular clause?
Sure. So we have under our dog exercise areas, Linklater Reserve is one of our most popular reserves for dogs being off leash. We also do have another clause in our policy that says we don't allow dogs on children's play equipment or within 30 metres, so there is a bit of a tension there. It is something that is ongoing, that we are looking to ongoing manage. At the moment, it may be something that needs to be particular for that reserve, but at this time it continues to function.
When we did the consultation or the pre-consultation on the policy, did we get any submissions specifically about the playground and Linklater Park at all?
It did come up in the early engagement. I think one of the reasons that Linklater is so popular is because it does have that mixed use aspect to it. What people are, the main kind of, I guess, sentiment that was coming through in early engagement is that people are generally satisfied with the controls that are in place. What they are looking for is better compliance with those controls. So there is high expectation of the community for one another to be observing the controls in the way that they are supposed to be.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Now, I'm just looking at page 175, 174 and 175 under the registration fees and other fees. I realise that decisions around registration fees is a separate one to this consultation. However, there's an indication from officers about a potential increase to registration fees under the fees and charges part of our long-term plan discussion. If we were to be increasing registration fees or any other fees more than the usual CPI, would it be appropriate at all to include that as a part of this conversation, or do you think that should be two completely separate discussions?
I believe that would be two separate discussions.
Okay, and just following further to that, the other fees on page 175 include, under number 25 there, impounding fees is crossed out, and I'm just wondering why that's crossed out. Is there no charge to owners if their dogs are impounded now, or other than the board during impounding?
There are still fees. What we have crossed that out for is an administrative error. There are no impounding fees set down under the Impounding Act, so that was incorrect and we have removed that.
Okay, and so are there still impounding fees?
I believe there are still impounding fees, yes.
So should we be leaving impounding fees there but take out the set down under Impounding Act part of it, or?
So I believe the change made underneath the struck out line, we have included instead sustenance and board during period of impounding set down under the Dog Control Act, which should rectify that.
Oh, so that's inclusive,
yes,
of okay, I'm with you now. Okay, thank you. That's all from me.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks, Stacey. Just a couple of questions. One arises around paragraph 7.6, page 150, 151, which is around the barking dog and the response to barking dog complaints. Are the amended words there in any way changing the threshold of council response to community concern around barking dogs?
No, the threshold remains the same. The change in the words aligns it with the wording of the Act, which provides more clarity again, both for our officers and for the community about when we will respond or how we will respond and what we will respond to.
And just for my awareness, the current threshold, can you describe the current threshold?
I might ask Aaron to answer that query.
So the current threshold in the Dog Control Act is really vague. It's loud and persistent is all we have to go on. So that's determined normally from an officer's assessment after he's gathered a lot of information from neighbours, the dog owner, the complainant.
Thanks. And can that be just a single complainant, as is inferred in 7.6 now, where it says distress to any person in the singular sense?
Yes, it can.
Okay, thank you. My other question is around whether we've given any consideration with Horizon's evolving approach to animals on public transport, now including dogs, whether we've considered any reference to Horizon's policy around dogs on buses to sit within this for completeness of awareness.
We haven't given consideration to that at this time. I note, though, that the policy makes a number of exceptions for dogs that are working or are assistance dogs, who may or may not be allowed to be on public transport for the purposes of working or providing assistance.
Thanks. I guess just to clarify, the current position of Horizons is that it's not just working dogs, any pets, provided they're muzzled if they're large dogs or contained if they're small dogs, are allowed. And I just wanted to know if, I guess, was there awareness of it and was there consideration of referencing that so there'd be cross-reference?
We haven't considered that at this point. If it comes up through the consultation process, we can manage that going forward as well.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to go to paragraph 714, where you've suggested additional wording to outline the responsibilities of owners to adequately house their dogs, and you've noted in 15 that it aligns it with the Code of Welfare for Dogs, particularly minimum standards for kennelling, shelter and ventilation. I just wondered why, if that is the case, you haven't included minimum standard number 5, kennelling, shelter and ventilation, as the paragraph, because that includes things like protection from, is fully shaded. It includes measures to be taken to keep dogs warm in cold weather. And, that is a subsection of the minimum standard. So I'm just wondering why we haven't just put the minimum standard in there.
We could put the entirety of the minimum standard in there. At this point, this is sufficient. Certainly the codes of welfare would be referenced if they ever needed to be. There are other controls in the policy that do provide for ongoing welfare needs of animals.
So I guess my question then will be, if we're putting in the responsibilities of owners to adequately house their dogs, why would we not put in the minimum standard? Or even better, the recommended standard?
As far as I'm aware, this is the code of what is in the Code of Welfare for Kennelling, so we have included that here.
What year's code are you looking at?
I believe in the policy we've referenced the 2018 code.
2018. So I've got the 2018 code up here. I can tell you that minimum standard number 5 is not reflected in that paragraph.
We can look into that further if that is the case.
Would you require a recommendation?
Further instruction on that would be appreciated.
Okay, thank you. I'm about to do that. I'll signal that I am putting that together. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks for letting me come back in the queue again. Just in terms of paragraph 10.3 there, which just talks about the consultation period, that was from 9 December through till 29 January. So any guidance in terms of when that consultation will take place now?
Assuming that consultation is approved today, we will be consulting from 10 January to 12 February, so that the hearing date, which has already been scheduled, can still be met.
Thank you.
All right. So we've got the recommendation there to approve the proposed Palmerston Dog Control Policy and Statement of Proposal for Consultation, attachments 1 and 2. I'll just wait till we get this amendment and we'll try and wrap them all up together. But look, I'm happy to move the first one anyway. Could I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So we'll just get that up, but I'll come to you, councillor, so you can speak to it.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So it's just a bit of a, I guess, on the fly amendment, but it occurred to me that there's no reason why we wouldn't just use the minimum standard for kennelling, shelter and ventilation from the Code of Welfare rather than a subset of that. If the aim is to inform dog owners what their responsibilities are for care and management regarding housing, then I think we should just include the minimum standard rather than us taking some things out of the minimum standard. So if we're going to have, I guess my argument is if we're going to have a paragraph about minimum standards, then it should reflect the Code of Welfare regulations and not just a subset of those regulations. And actually, I think, you know, potentially there's an argument for including the recommended best practice, which is a step above that. But at least let's have the minimum standard in anyway. Thank you.
Okay, we'll just get that up. I think what we'll do is if everyone's okay, we'll just move the whole lot together, because I think it should be self-explanatory. We'll vote on both together, councillors. I'm just looking at the time and just trying to get through things, so if everyone's okay with that. Okay. All right, I don't think we need to speak any more on that. There's no other speakers. You don't need to write a reply. No, good. Thank you. We will vote. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, moving through to number 11 and back to you again, Stacey. And this is around proposed animals and bees bylaw, and again, approval for consultation. It's page 119 of your older 6th of December papers.
Kia ora anō. Happy to bring you the draft Animals and Bees bylaw for consultation approval as well. You'll recall that the Strategy and Finance Committee received a report in March of this year that identified the perceived problem and provided advice for the determinations that this council made under section 155 of the Local Government Act. Our review of the bylaw has found that it is functioning as is expected. Palmerston North has a range of kept animals in the city in a range of different settings, which is supported by the variety of different types of properties we have. I just wanted to highlight with you the most significant change we are proposing to the bylaw, which is the requirement for cats to be desexed at 4 months instead of 6 months. There are a few reasons for this. The intention of that control is to aid in cat population control and with mitigating nuisances associated with owned cats, noting that there are at this time several thousand more owned cats in the city than there are, for example, owned dogs. The Code of Welfare for Companion Cats provides information that cats reach the age of puberty at around 4 months. This means that for the purposes of population management to avoid nuisance, a cat needs to be desexed before it reaches puberty. It is otherwise possible for one female cat to produce over 300 kittens in their lifetime. We have engaged with cat welfare groups as part of this review. They are currently tracking domestic cat colonies in the city and have reported an increase in domestic cat colonies. Their understanding is that the stray cat population is a result of owned cats not being desexed. We have engaged with the SPCA as well as with Forest and Bird as part of our review of the bylaw, and they support this change as well. We are otherwise proposing changes to align our policy with specific codes of welfare, as well as some changes that will assist with readability and interpretation. I'd just like to bring to your attention two further points. The first is that the bylaw is intended to address nuisance issues, not welfare issues in the first instance. This is acknowledging that good animal husbandry practices, which are outlined in our bylaw, prevent nuisance. The other is that this bylaw does not apply to wild or to feral animals, for example, feral cats, which are the responsibility of the regional council and which they deal with through their regional pest management plan. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Stacey. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Stacey. Do we understand the level of compliance with the current bylaw around desexing of cats?
From discussions we've had with veterinarians as part of this review, most people are desexing their companion cats.
I guess, how do we know that that's representative of the wider community?
Sure. We aren't seeing a significant increase, though there is some increase. There is no significant increase in stray cat populations and feral cat populations beyond what we already know there are. So we're sort of making an assumption that cats are being desexed.
I guess connecting this a little bit, I'm lucky to be here on the day that we're also going to be talking, or the week that we're going to be talking about the budget for the years ahead. Is there any resourcing in the draft LTP, and this may not be one that you can answer, is there any resourcing within the draft LTP to increase the level of monitoring around compliance around desexing of cats in the city?
I'm not able to answer that question. I'm getting a shaking head from Aaron.
Which way is it shaking?
Left to right, not up and down.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. There's no further questions. We've got the recommendation there that Council approve the draft Palmerston North Animals and Bees Bylaw 2024, Attachment 1, Administration Manual, Attachment 2, and Statement of Proposal, Attachment 3 for consultation. I'm happy to move it, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'm not going to really speak to it. I don't think there's a need to do it. Unless there is any other comments, we will vote, please. There's passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we'll jump back now to our original 18th of December papers. This is on page 71, and this is around Statement of Expectations. This one's with CEDA, and I'll invite David Murphy up to speak to that. Page 71, and it's a CEDA Statement of Expectation, 24-25 to 26-27 in our LTP.
Kia ora koutou, Mr Mayor, councillors. I'll take the report as read. Just a couple of key points. Obviously, the Statement of Expectations was prepared with consultation of our shareholding partner, MDC. I can advise that MDC approved the Statement of Expectations as attached to this report on Friday. There is a shift in the Statement of Expectations to a 3-yearly Statement of Expectations. That doesn't mean that in any subsequent year, if the council or MDC or the shareholders wanted to make a change, that they couldn't issue an updated Statement of Expectations, but it's about trying to send a set of messages over the LTP cycle. CEDA would still be required to provide an annual Statement of Intent, despite the Statement of Expectations covering 3 years. There's been a series of minor adjustments to the Statement of Expectations. One of the additions I'd like to highlight is a new major focus on the inward investment in the city centre and the town centre in Feilding, given council's expectations around residential development in the city centre, investment in earthquake-prone buildings, starting to look at the city centre and the Feilding town centre as investment opportunities for CEDA. So happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Ngā mihi, David. Just looking at 2.7 and 2.8 on page 72 there, and referencing that the new focus that you just talked about with the city centre and town centre inward investment. Just note that the 2.7 and 2.8 are quite descriptive about the purpose of that new focus, but that's not, I don't think that's really picked up in the statement of expectation. To what degree are we certain that CEDA understand what we mean by this unexplained new focus?
Yeah, good question. I appreciate the report probably goes a little bit further than the Statement of Expectations, which talks about inward investment. The Statement of Expectations does also talk about that expectations that CEDA delivers their activities and business in a way which demonstrates that they understand our strategic direction. Certainly in my workings with CEDA, I'm confident that they understand council's broad expectations for Palmerston North City Centre around residential, hotel, earthquake strengthening, civic and cultural facilities.
Right, so that's been clearly articulated.
Yeah, I mean, it's, as I said, there's other parts of the Statement of Expectations that talk about making sure that they're recognising and taking their work in accordance with our strategic direction.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Harpiter.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, David. Just following up on Councillor Zabellan's question on 2.7, have you put any numbers towards that of what the expectation is for Palmerston North in particular? I'm not so interested in Feilding.
No, nothing's specific. Sorry, in terms of numbers, but
so no target for them to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect that in their statement of intent, they would come back, as they have with some of their other core activity areas, with some KPIs about how they would measure their performance, given that the statement of expectation has some higher level indicators that they're working towards.
So how do we measure that? That's probably where I'm coming from. I think that's where Councillor Zabellan was coming from. How do we measure it?
Well, we could measure that in a range of ways in terms of the strategic objectives that we have for the city centre, so the amount of people living in the city centre, the dollar investment from building consents. So there's a range of, the number of earthquake-prone buildings that are strengthened. So there's a range of data that's readily accessible to council and or CEDA that would help measure that success. That may well be something, as I said, that CEDA could expand on their statement of intent.
Okay, thank you.
So, David, just following on from that, I mean, I get a lot of reports from them, and there is some KPIs, and I think that's where both councillors are going, is just how do we influence those KPIs? And you gave some examples of what could happen with the city centre. Where do we feed into that?
Well, I mean, rather than maybe coming up with them on the spot here, we could add something to the statement of expectations that asks CEDA to come back with what they consider the best indicators as part of their statement of intent, which would come back to the council for approval. So that could be something that's added to the statement of expectations, and I don't anticipate that MDC would have an issue with that. They may have slightly different objectives for the Fielding Town Centre, but I think the statement of intent could be reflective of that.
So it could be something like a list of best indicators to measure the SOE outcomes, something along those lines?
Yeah, the Mayor and the Chairperson of the Economic Growth Committee, if the recommendations are passed, have the authority to make minor amendments, and I could suggest a sentence which asks CEDA to come back with what they think are the best indicators to measure that new top priority.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Harper.
I was going to say the same thing, so we're right.
Okay. All right. Okay, there's no more questions. So we've got the two recommendations there. Thank you, David. One is Council adopt the CEDA SOE 24-25 to 26-27 for the LTP, included as one, that the Mayor, Chairperson of Economic Growth Committee be delegated authority to make minor amendments to the CEDA Statement of Expectations 24-25 to 26-27 within our LTP, included as Statement 1 in order to accommodate any minor amendments sought by MDC as our joint CEDA stakeholder. I'm happy to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. I'll just make one comment that it would be good, David, and officers, if we could perhaps look to craft up something that covers off those issues so they are captured. Great. Being no further comments, we will vote. That's passed 16 votes for and none against. All right, move through to number 14, which is around Statement of Expectations for our cultural facilities, Te Manawa Museums Trust, the Regent Theatre, and the Globe Theatre. Deputy Mayor.
Kia ora, Mr Mayor. Just, sorry, I forgot to declare earlier an interest. I don't believe it's a conflict, but an interest with regards to the Globe.
Okay, thank you. So I'll invite Gillian Tasker, our Arts Advisor, to speak to these. Gillian. Page 79 of your papers, councillors.
Ena kai konihira tēnā koutou. Nā iwi e tōnei tēnā koutou, ko Gillian Tasker aho, he ko tohu tohu tō tāwhai hapore nā toi. Greetings everyone, my name is Gillian Tasker, Community Development Advisor for the Arts. I'm happy to take this report as read, but would like to note, if Council agrees the Statement of Expectations until June 2025, the Globe Theatre and the Regent Theatre will present their draft Statements of Intent to the Culture and Sport Committee on March 27th, 2024. However, Te Manawa have indicated that they wish to request an increase in their funding. Officers have advised Te Manawa to present their draft Statement of Intent, including their proposed budget, to the Culture and Sport Committee on February the 7th, 2024. Should the committee resolve to progress an increased grant for Te Manawa, they can then refer this to the draft long-term plan, also being deliberated in February. This is a change to what is included in the report as it's emerged after the report was finalised, but dates included in the letters allow for Te Manawa Museums Trust to prepare and present their draft Statement of Intent earlier than the Globe and the Regent. Our recommendation is that Council agree the Statements of Expectations for Te Manawa Museums Trust, the Regent Theatre Trust and the Globe Theatre Trust 2024-2025 until June 2025. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa, I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a question around the additional objectives that are proposed to be added to each of the statements around outline your approach to engaging with and enabling participation by underrepresented communities. What work has been done or will be done with the boards of the CCOs to enable them to understand what is meant by that?
I think we have already had some discussion with both the boards and the managers, in particular noting that it has been difficult for them to come up with a measure as such, and that is why we have had a change in the language to try and get them to reflect their wider range of actions that they take to support those two objectives. That may include, for example, having representation on their boards. It may include working with various stakeholders, and it's not just a simple quantitative count, it's both qualitative measures as well.
So how can we expect that to be reported back in a narrative paragraph or something like that?
Yes, that's what we would expect.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Ngā mihi, Gillian. Just looking at these three statement of expectations, they each have at 2 a table of expectations with a reasonable amount of detail as to what we expect and how we expect they'll go about that. Are they expectations that we've asked the CCOs to go away and suggest to us, or are they ones that we have posed?
They are ones that we have posed, yes.
Right, thank you. Mr Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Gillian. So we have a recommendation to council there. There's no further questions. That council agree the statements of expectations for Te Manawa Museums Trust, the Regent Theatre Trust and the Globe Theatre Trust for 2024-25, attachments 3 until June 2025. I'm happy to move that, seconded by Councillor Bowen. And if there is no commentary, there is. Sorry, Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to support this recommendation, noting that it brings us nicely into alignment as we go through this long-term plan cycle and gets CCOs underway with their statements of intent, which, as the officer indicated, will be in good time to come back to committee early next year, Te Manawa being the earliest, and just again to reinforce that alignment with long-term plan. So very happy to move forward now. Thank you.
Great. All right, there being no further commentary, we'll vote, please. That's passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you. All right, we move through to number 17, and it's the Palmerston Performing Arts Trust Annual Report, Annual Accounts. Yeah, and look, we'll take that as being read. It's paper there on page 249 from our Democracy and Governance Manager, Hannah. I'll take it as being read. Only thing I would say that we had a pleasant morning where we gave away our three applications to our, I'm just trying to think of the name of the Arts Heart, that's it, thank you. Just needed reminding. Arts Heart applications, and it was great to see several in there to pick that up. And also we farewelled long-standing chair Sheridan Hickey, who's done an amazing job for arts, full stop, but especially this small trust. You'll see the bank statements and everything there. It's reviewed rather than an audit. We fought that for many years, as you can recall. It was our biggest cost as a trust, and it was quite an unnecessary need to audit it every single year. It will be audited every few years to ensure that we're on top of things. So I'm not going to move it because I'm on the Trust, but if Councillor Bowen can move that, and seconded by Councillor Harpiter, and it's around recommendation to Council that Council receive the Palmerston Performing Arts Trust annual report and financial statements for the year ending 30 June 23 as attached, and the memo titled Palmerston North Performing Arts Trust Annual Report and Annual Accounts 2022-23 presented to Council on 18th of December 2023. And I'll open it up for commentary. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for noting in your comments that we farewell Sheridan Hickey from that trust board. There aren't many people who would be described as stalwart in quite the way that Sheridan is, so her moving on is a loss to that trust, but we know she's not moving on from Palmerston North, so still an asset to our community, and delighted to see Margaret May stepping into that chair role. I did just particularly want to note with delight the appointment of 2 advisory trustees, Eli Hancock and Lottie Perry, which definitely signals a changing of the guard in that trust body particularly. Very good news for that trust to see a different energy come into it. I'm very pleased. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. There's no further comments. We will vote, please. And that's passed. 15 votes for and 1 abstention. If I could invite, we're going to jump one because we're just waiting for a staff member to arrive, but we'll go to number 19, which is around Tamakuku Terrace. Just invite Bryce Hosking up. That's page 285 of your papers. Yep, thank you, Councillor. And over to you, Bryce.
Kia ora, councillors. Look, I'm happy to take this report as read. Probably the only comment I would say is we have seen quite a notable increase in interest around section sales. Since September alone, we've had about 6. After probably the 6 months preceding that, we had 0. So there's really has been quite a renewed interest. Talking to some of our development partners, the likes of the house builders, they've also reported that they've seen quite a remarkable increase all of a sudden around the interest levels, and are actively having discussions around a number of future sections as well. So that's very positive activity. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Bryce. Good to hear. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. Can you give us any more information about why Homes for People have decided not to proceed with their agreed purchases? I mean, I understand there might be a confidentiality element to this, but what can you share that might inform our thinking going forward?
Yes, given we're in part 1, I'll try and word it accordingly. So the original arrangement that was on the table is the one that didn't proceed. That being said, we are in continued negotiations with them around still purchasing some sites within the subdivision. In fact, as latest as Friday, we met with them again to hopefully progress through into a sale. So, look, and I think, and I'm just very mindful of not putting words in their mouths either, but much like many other purchases as well, unfortunately, timing of when we were looking to do that transaction worked against us a little bit, and it became quite a difficult environment to do things in.
I'm just aware that we had hoped through that arrangement to be able to provide affordable housing in that subdivision, and I'm wondering if you still think that's possible, and if it's not, I mean, would we be able to get a report back at some stage on lessons learned, or how we might be able to achieve these outcomes going forward?
I think it's absolutely possible we can still achieve affordable housing outcomes. So, part of the way we structured the subdivision itself in terms of a different variety of sizes and opportunities within there as well is helping to provide some affordability. We've also been doing quite a bit of work with some of the group builders who have also been doing a bit of work with central government as well around how they can be doing some affordable packages. And for instance, there's one advertised at the moment, a brand new 3-bedroom house for $700,000, which is I'll use the word relatively affordable in terms of opportunities in the wider marketplace. In terms of doing a report back on the resolutions and the angle we were going down in terms of directly looking at affordability, I think that's definitely possible. And I think there is an opportunity to look at some of the lessons learned around what worked and what didn't.
Sorry, I should have been a bit clearer. In terms of being able to provide affordable housing, I think many people would think that $700,000 was not affordable. What I meant was, in terms of our partnership with a CHIP, with a community housing provider, is that still an option? I mean, I guess, there's a degree of frustration here, I suppose, from me in terms of the outcomes that we are or are not achieving through this subdivision. And certainly we spent some time as a council traversing different options and looking at how we could do it. So whilst I accept that there was some affordability thinking put into the section size and so on, I feel that our hopes for affordability were much more around a partnership with a community housing provider. And so I'd be interested in your take on whether that's still an option.
Thank you for revising the question, Councillor. Look, yes, I think it is. And as I said, we are in still active negotiations with Homes of People, for instance, around actually still looking to do something within the subdivision. Along those lines, it's a revised arrangement from where we originally were, but those conversations are genuine and proactive at this stage.
Okay, I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to ask a question on the table on page 286. So it says that there's been no change in advertised prices since the sections were released to the market in late 2021. I guess it's a double-barrel question. One, what is your thinking there as to why we haven't adjusted to changing market conditions? And two, are the sales that we're seeing at the level we're marketing them at, or are we seeing sales at a lower level than what our marketed price is?
Every single sale so far in the subdivision, including the more recent ones, are at valuation price.
Which is what they advertised as, because I note on here it says the valuation came after they were listed on the market.
Yep, correct. So the prices that were set in January 2022 are the prices that we've been using, and all of the market feedback we've been getting most recently from both the individual purchasers coming through the real estate agents as well as the builders is that pricing is correct, and they are seeing interest at that price.
So you're happy with where it's at now, that there's no need for course correction or change in those levels?
Based on that evidence, my opinion would be no.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've heard some criticism about section size. Do you think that's a factor with only 4 sales in 6 months? I obviously I noticed there's varying sizes. How many of the smaller sections are there compared to the larger ones? Any idea?
Well, if we take the average section size in Palmerston North as being about 700 square metres, I would say about 2/3 of them are less than that. Maybe 20%, without having the exact numbers in front of me, would be, say, under 450 square metres. Whether that's been a factor in sales up until now, well, I can't say definitively whether it was or was not. Probably my reflection would simply be that the house and section sale market over probably the last 12 months in particular has been very difficult. We had about 6 or 7 purchasers who actually had committed to section sales who were unable to get finance through the banks, for instance. And that was completely irrespective of the sections, and some of those were actually smaller sections as well. So it has been a very challenging market, and I think that's probably been one of the key drivers, and it is pretty encouraging to see quite a notable uptake in the last few months.
Is stage 2 going to be more larger sections than smaller?
Forgive me, I don't have the exact square metres, but I think the average section size in stage 2 is about 550 square metres.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. How do we square this kind of fairly slow pace of sales with what we keep on hearing about the need to fund growth and how much demand there is for housing?
That's a very good question. Well, with growth comes demand, and I don't think that the demand for housing has actually diminished, ironically, over the last sort of 12 months or so. I think that demand has been there. It's simply been a very difficult and challenging environment to actually get new houses being built and being sold. So the current group builder model essentially requires turnover to be efficient. So typically they don't like to sit on a high number of sections or houses for any amount of time. They need to have that constant rotation of things to essentially continue to build new. And we're starting to see that even within Tamakuku. So as they've actually managed to build something and sell one, then they very quickly move on to the next one, and so be it. So actually, even within that development itself, you're starting to see a bit of momentum out there. I think there's 10, 12 houses either built or underway at the moment alone, and that momentum seems to be picking up. I think it's also important to note that it hasn't just been our subdivision that isn't selling and everywhere else was. For instance, it's been a nationwide slowdown, and Palms North was not immune to that. As we continue to move through into a better economic environment, I would expect that to start picking up again as that demand continues.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Bryce. Just before I go to Councillor Harper, so my understanding was the subdivision was at market rates, wasn't it?
Correct.
Right, okay. So the way we helped CHIPS was obviously smaller section sizes, some different ways of settling and those sorts of things?
Yes, correct. And we also anchored the pricing to when we entered into the arrangement, which at the time it was a pretty rapid moving market at that time.
Okay, all right. I'm just trying to get my head around all that. Thanks. Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Bryce. Are we getting told, let's follow up from Councillor Arnott's question, are we getting told by anybody in the market that the sections are too small?
I haven't received any feedback from anyone that they were too small. A piece of feedback that came from our real estate agent partners, I suppose, was that it would be very useful to come up with a couple of potential builds and what that might actually look like, get some good outcomes on some of those smaller sites. And we worked directly with both JPAC and Ginian Homes, who had already purchased into the subdivision, to come up with a couple of concepts on what that might look like. So they were quite willing partners in that and actually came up with some pretty, technical term, funky designs that actually got some pretty good outcomes, and that has made a little bit of a difference.
So of all of our sections, what proportion are on that 400 square metres and what proportion are the larger?
Sorry, I don't have that to hand. I could provide an overview of exactly what sections were what size and what they sold for.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
All right, thank you, Bryce. That's the questions done. So recommendation is there that we receive the memo titled Tamakuku Terrace, 6-monthly update presented today, 18th of December 2023. I'll move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Johnson.
Did you want to speak to it first, Mr. I just wanted to make some comments around the affordable housing partnerships, as you would probably guess from my questions. We tried something new with this subdivision in trying to set up a partnership with a community housing partner to provide much more affordable, smaller houses on smaller sections. And we were all quite hopeful, I think, at the time, although it went through several iterations through council before we could tie it down. We were all quite hopeful that that would be able to be achieved. So it's a bit disappointing at this stage to hear that, and I don't know the reasons, that the previously signed agreement has come to an end and there's no commitment to purchase any sections. And I guess what I want to do is sound a note of caution here. We've been encouraged to think about working with partners in the community housing space, in the social housing space, but where the delivery of outcomes relies on external organisations that we're partnering with, as we can see, sometimes those outcomes are not delivered. And so I just think we need to be a little bit aware of the risks of relying on partnerships to deliver outcomes when things can clearly go awry. Now, there may be, I don't know what the reasons for it are, and so I'll be interested to see a report back at some stage. But I think we just need to keep this front of mind going forward in the long-term plan, where people are suggesting, partnerships for Summer Hayes Street, partnerships for other types of housing, Huia Street and so on. Partnerships don't always deliver. And so I think we need to be a wee bit careful about that. Thanks.
Councillor Fitzgerald.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just some comments. So we were actually invited by the council to participate in the Tamakuku development, but what excluded us from being able to do that was the price of the land in the section. So was that development, that was fine, but we just couldn't make the word affordable fit with land at the value of $250,000. So it's unfortunate that we couldn't do that. So when we're talking about joining up with community providers that are in the community, it will always come back to cost, and unfortunately for Tamakuku, it's landed back in the market. And so we even asked for the council's description of the word affordable, and we weren't able to land on that either. So, but we do thank the council for that consideration, but that was the reason why we didn't participate in Tamakuku.
Councillor Happer.
Thank you, and thanks to the officer for the report. We've got a lot of sections for sale, still for sale, and that is a concern for the council because we're still sitting on a lot of property that hasn't been sold yet. And as Councillor Barrett said, we are trying to grow housing and we haven't done it yet. And I agree with Councillor Johnson, we haven't done it in the social area, and obviously it's not affordable. But if we can't do it in that area, we have to look at what we're going to do with this land because it's just still sitting vacant. And if we've not got it right for the market, we've got to get it right for the market. If it's not going to fit, if we're not going to fit that shoe in that box, we've got to try and fit the right shoes in that box. Because at the moment, the social housing isn't fitting in that box. So we've got to get the sections right for the market so that we can sell them and get money back for the council for our ratepayers. Thank you.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a few quick comments. One is, yeah, of course, partnerships don't always work. We don't have to look much further than Summer Shakespeare to know that partnerships can fall through. But I would hate for this to be a death knell to the concept of partnerships for the provision of community housing. There's other ways we can do it. As we've discussed in our promotion of the Community Housing Partnership Program, we could look at a long-term lease for 100 years where there isn't that upfront land cost, as Councillor Fitzgerald outlined, to the community partner. So our contribution is the land and their contribution to the building. I'm not saying we do that in this space, but I just want to preface that by saying This may not have worked out, although it was said by the officer they are still in negotiation with that provider, so there may be space yet to come. On the question of market prices and size, I had the privilege in a previous role of writing the reports that were provided to council. I wrote the feedback from people who viewed these properties and sent it through to the consultant, who then would have filtered it through to our officers, which then gets filtered through to us, these reports. And in any market, there's some people who think it's too small, some people who think it's too big, some people who don't like the shape. So I think the question of size, although it's a valid one, probably isn't, we're not going to get a very clear answer on it, because there's always a survivorship bias. The people who think it's too small aren't going to go to the open home for it, and therefore their feedback's not going to get filtered through to us. So I think it's good to have a diverse mix of sizes, because that diversifies our market appeal. In terms of prices, well, I don't think any of us can sit here today and say there's been no change to market value over the last 2 years, and yet it says in the report we haven't changed our prices in 2 years. So I think it's no mystery as to why they haven't sold. I mean, there's only 3 reasons why a property doesn't sell: presentation, price, or something's wrong with the property in and of itself. You can't change things in and of the property itself, but you can change the presentation and price. Presentation's starting to shift, as the officer has said. Homes are starting to appear. People are starting to see what the suburb could look like. The only thing we really have within our control here is the price. And so if we want them to sell quicker, we need to lower the prices. If we're happy to hold out to get the absolute maximum value, as would appear to be is starting to pay off years later, then we hold the line and we keep this. But it's not that complicated. It's either we lower the price or we wait and hope that the market catches back up to where we want it to be.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. It's been interesting, and thank the officer for the report. I was just talking to several developers on Saturday evening, and things have been very quiet. So pretty well mimicked everything that the officer said, but they've just started to move again. There's 2 things going on here. I think if we wanted to really engage with the community housing providers, we need to subsidise it. It's as simple as that. It's the cost of land. Land doesn't get any cheaper, although we've held our costs for the last 2 years. And there's other ways you can do when you can help with 99-year leases. So you take, and that's what Missoula have done over in Montana to get some community housing going. They've done long land leases because the cost of land in any country is still quite expensive. Rates for emissions are other ways of doing things as well, and Wellington tried that a few years ago as well. But look, I do think they are starting to move. It just does take a bit of time sometimes, and that's I suppose the art, or the dark art of development. You've just got to hold out sometimes, and then there'll be a flood of things happen. So I think houses are. I went for a little tiki tour around there myself. It's starting to come to life now. You don't always want to be the first one or even the second one. You certainly don't want to be the last one either. But it's coming along, and I think we'll get another June next year. We'll get another update, and we'll probably find things have moved along. I'm pretty sure they will have, because there's not actually a lot of sections for sale in Palmerston North at the moment, and we probably hold, along with green developments up in Akatari, probably the greatest amount of sites probably in the city. So it should move eventually. So thank you to the officers, and we will vote. Okay, that's passed 15 votes for and none against. All right, we'll squeeze one more in before our afternoon tea, and if I could ask Stacey Bell, our City Economist, to come up. This is around our quarterly economic update to December 2023. Page 261, and Stacey. No.
Thank you.
We're on.
Stacey Bell, City Economist, Palmerston North City Council. I'm actually quite surprised to get in today, considering the volume you had to get through, so I'm glad to be here. Looking at the economic conditions of the last quarter, we've seen a slowdown nationally and here in the city. The economy has proven incredibly resilient over the last 3 years, far more resilient than anyone expected. Now that we're starting to see that slowdown, interest rate expectations are improving substantially, so we would expect both inflation and interest rates to begin moving in the right direction toward the end of next year, which is a I guess, a cycle we had to go through. Very difficult in the meantime for a lot of families, households and businesses, and we will see that throughout 2024. But there is light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the end of next year and moving past that time. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Stacey. So pages 261 through to 280, 284. Thank you. Councillor Zabel.
Thanks, Mayor. Ngā mihi, Stacey. Excuse me. I'm just looking at 2.6 in your report there, which is at page 262 of our papers, and it's an interesting figure there that 1,600 international migrants settled in Palmerston North over the year to June. Just wondering if we have updated figures to September quarter, and also, do we have any idea what impact that might have had on the housing, or these newcomers to the city finding housing? The stats for new housing are quite a bit lower, I noticed.
Absolutely. Yeah, 1,600, very strong net international migration over the year. I think the latest figures for New Zealand are sitting at 128,900, so have blown the zero expectations from a lot of commentators out of the water for this year. What we are seeing, we don't have updated figures for September, so we only get those figures annually, and they are estimates, so still provisional. But what we can see from the data is that we are experiencing quite strong population growth. What we're seeing across New Zealand and in the city is quite strong pressure on rental prices, so that would be indicative of the extra demand. So that is the downside of net international migration. But on the other side of the equation, the workers coming into our city and across New Zealand are really helping to ease those supply side pressures that have been driving inflation over the last couple of years. So the housing is definitely where we're seeing a bit of pressure there from the net international migration, with many benefits on the other side of the equation.
Thank you. That's all from me, Mr. Mayor.
So, Stacey, these numbers are Palmerston or city specific, aren't they? They're not Manawatu.
The figures for population growth are Palmerston North, yes.
Right. What about all the other economic indicators? Are they a bit of a mishmash between the district and us, or?
They are concentrated on Palmerston North, but we do compare with Manawatu region, Manawatu, Wanganui and New Zealand, where appropriate.
Okay. Great. All right. There's no further questions, so thank you very much. Appreciate the work you do, and you've done this year. So we've got recommendations to council that committee receive the following reports for information. The Palmerston Quarterly Economic Update to December 2023 and the Palmerston City Quarterly Electronic Card Spending Report to September quarter 2023. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. As the officer said, it's obvious that things have been relatively resilient compared to all the lumpiness of some of the numbers that are there. So we're holding up reasonably well, and good to see construction in a bigger sense was quite strong too. So I'll leave it at that if there's no further comments, and we will look to vote, please. And that's passed 16 votes for and none against. We'll try and squeeze one more in. So number 20, household and neighbourhood composting options. So I'll ask Bryce Hosking to come forward. It's page 289 of our papers. And Natasha as well. Sorry, Natasha, I didn't see you in the gallery.
Kia ora again, councillors. Look, we're happy to take this one as read and answer any questions.
Councillor Barrett.
Kia ora koutou. Thanks for bringing the report to us. Useful backgrounder makes use reference to the Year 1 program coming into the LTP that's going to enable these investigations. Can you just tell us what the relevant line item or program number is in the LTP?
It's an operating program. I don't have that number to hand, but
Thanks. It would be useful if we could get that, and my follow-up question would be to understand how much is in that line item currently, and how much we would need in that line item if we were to include investigations at the neighborhood and household level.
I'll just let Natasha bring up some figures. So we essentially have two line items next financial year around investigations. The big service-wide one that we've talked about in before, and the targeted one towards food scraps collection, but I think naturally it also expands into looking at some of these kind of opportunities. We don't believe that needs to increase in dollars. We should just be able to include that in the scope within the current budget envelope. I'll just confirm how much that is.
I don't know which program number it is, but it's called Food Scraps, Detailed Analysis of Program Delivery. And it's so on page 225 of your report, and under operational programs right at the bottom, and it's 75,000 in year one and 26, sorry, the writing's really small, 25 or 26,000 in year two. I think it was 25, but maybe the 26 is for inflation.
Great, thank you. So probably building a little bit on Bryce's response then, did I hear that there's potential around including within the scope neighborhood and household without budget adjustment being required?
Correct. We should be able to incorporate that in the current budget.
But would that need further direction from council?
No, we're happy just to take that and include it.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Zabellan.
Thank you, Ngā mihi korua. Two really quick ones from me. One, are there any indications so far from the new government in relation to waste reform and these requirements?
So looking through the coalition agreements and the 100-day, it's really hard to talk to you.
Oh, sorry.
It's really awkward. Looking through the coalition, Natasha Hickmott, Activities Manager for Resource Recovery and Sustainability. Looking through the coalition agreements and the 100-day plan, there is nothing specific in that. And talking to the MFE, which is about a week ago, they had not had their briefing with the incoming minister. So I guess the direction of travel, as far as I'm concerned, still remains the same.
Thank you. We'll watch that space. And my second question is just relating to 3.6 of your report, which is on page 293. Just talks about locations and the difficulty in pinpointing appropriate locations, particularly because of Reserve Act restrictions. Did we consider community gardens or organisations that hold licences under the Reserves Act to operate those kinds of spaces? Are they permitted to, even at the moment, maintain a compost system on site?
I guess that would depend on whether they are, so composting is a permitted activity if certain parameters and certain thresholds are met under the current One Plan. The trouble is if they're on community gardens or community places and that they don't meet those thresholds, the issue I have, and I've had this discussion with Horizons, sorry, big day. So I've had this discussion with Horizons and they're not sure who they would go talk to if those parameters weren't met. So I think there's a few things that need to be worked out, but that's certainly something that we would certainly look at considering.
Thank you. That's all from me, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Right, we've got the recommendation to council. Thanks, Natasha. Thanks, Bryce. Council received the memo titled Household and Neighbourhood Composting Options presented to council on the 18th of December today, 2023. I'm happy to seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any comments? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just briefly to acknowledge the officers and appreciate the effort gone in to bring this report. I think it paints a really helpful piece of context that can help us understand the investigations as they proceed. And in light of some of the decisions we have coming up later this week, incredibly pleased to hear that we can take those within scope rather than needing to adjust budget. Thank you.
Excellent, agreed. Okay, we will vote, please. All right, that has passed 16 votes for and none against. All right, what I'm going to do, councillors, is we're going to do the council work schedule, then we're going to go to part 2 and then we'll have a break. And that means we can come back and we can deal to all the part 2 items, which are tenders. And then we will come back and if we've got time, we'll start to work through the other the other deferred papers. So we've got the work schedule, which is number 21, council work schedule of December 2023, and that's on page 295 of our papers. Pretty self-explanatory. I'm quite happy to move that the council receives its work schedule dated today, 18th of December 2023, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any comments? There being none, we will vote, please. And that has passed 16 votes for and none against. Just try to find where. All right. That has passed 16 votes for, none against. Thank you. All right. We will now look to move to part 2. I don't have anything here to talk to. All right, so our reasons for going into part 2 are third-party commercial, negotiations, and again, third-party commercial. I will look to, have we got the rest of them there? Is that the lot? Okay. Okay, so if we can go to the top, please. Okay, recommendation that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting listed in the table below. The general subject of each matter is considered while the public's been excluded, which we've just gone through under the Act. I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Some comments, Councillor Barrett.
More of a question, really. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Around item 30. My read of that report is it's kind of a mashup of what went wrong and tenders, and I'm just wondering, was any consideration given to seeing the what went wrong part in part 1 and keeping the tender in part 2?
We'll just get one of the officers to respond.
Sorry, it might be easier than trying to reach over Chris to speak to his microphone. Well, ideally, yes. Given the expediency of the matter and sort of the relative urgency, we were bringing a report together as quickly as we could, and hence it sort of getting covered all off in one report. My suggestion would be that we could look to give out certain pieces of as much information as we possibly can immediately after part 2, and only cover off some of the commercials in part 2.
Thank you. Is urgency sufficient grounds under the Goima?
I'm not sure if I'm the right one to be answering that question. Urgency gives us the opportunity to look to take an exemption action through our procurement process to look to do a direct award. In terms of what's available under the Goima, I might have to pass off to one of my colleagues.
The reason given is for the negotiations for the contract, as I understand it, with the proposed contractor.
understood what's in the papers. I guess I was trying to clarify from the officer's response where he indicated that urgency was a deciding or a contributing factor in the decision to have a combined report in part 2. And was trying to understand whether urgency is grounds under the Bogoima.
No, it isn't. It's negotiations is the reason that's been used. Urgency doesn't really, well, it doesn't come out here. I'm sorry, that I don't think that probably we should have said in terms of why it's, why it has multiple parts to the paper.
Great. Thank you for those clarifications. Thank you.
And Councillor Johnson.
Yes, also about the same item, and Councillor Barrett has covered some of the ground that I wanted to ask about. But given a comment was made in a public meeting the other day, how does that affect the decision to now have this in a part 2?
We have discussed that and had a query around that and determined that the reasons for it to be considered in part 2 persist despite any unintentional disclosure.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks, councillors. That's done the comments and questions to officers. So look, we've got it there, and it's been moved by myself, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. We will vote, please. That has passed 16 votes for and none against. Thank you, councillors. Look, we'll break now till 25 past. Have a break, have a cup of tea, and I'm back in the chamber then, and we'll get through what we can get through. Thank you.